And then you have Islamists who are there who will chant things in Arabic that people around them, if you don't speak Arabic or if you are not familiar with these chants, you don't even realize how extreme they are. Like, so I recorded some of them chanting about Kevar, which is a chant referencing a time, a part of Islamic tradition stories that Muhammad's army in the 7th century in Arabia slaughtered and killed Jewish communities, and they have a chant associated to that. So, and they say that Muhammad's army is coming. It's coming for the Jews, and where they uses Yahud, they don't say Israelis, they say Jews. So if you're just around there and you don't understand this, you wouldn't even realize it. There have been speakers at some of these so-called pro-Palestine rallies that are literally calling for jihad and urging for Muslim armies, these are their words, to wage jihad.
Andy Ngo, we have not done this in a long time. It's been like, what, 4 or 5 years since we've seen each other in person. We were unclear what country it was in, but here we are in London at ARC.
And I'm very thankful to be here. It makes it special, given that there's so much time has passed. There's a lot to talk about.
There is a lot to talk about. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the things that you've been warning about on the ground, really starting in Portland, Seattle, Pacific Northwest, with Antifa and BLM, a lot of that now has, the chaos around that has kind of spread all over the world. But here we are in London first. So let's do that first. Why are you here at ARC? Do a little of that, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty.
Well, I'm here at ARC as an attendee to, I think we're a couple years now, or I should say number of months after what governments did to the world because of pandemic lockdowns. And I think people have moved on and they've just forgotten how bad things were there. And there's how people should be having discussions are in person. And I feel like a lot of people have forgotten that. They've gotten so used to the Zooms, meetings, the YouTube videos and all that, which is a great form of communication, but getting together in person it's different. I'm sure you can attest to that. If we did this interview by a Skype, it's very different than you and I sitting in front of one another. So having a conference in person in London where all of us can come together with these different ideas, many dissident ideas, counter ideas on how society could potentially be better organized, that's something I want to be a part of. I'm still angry that our lives were disrupted for years, shut down for years, because of government policies.
Yeah, and what you're sort of known for is being on the ground at a lot of these events over the years, and the protests and the riots and the violence that we've seen in so many of our cities. And now we're seeing a sort of new version of that. We've sort of seen the BLM Antifa thing. To me, it's like the mask came off almost overnight, and now here in London, just over the last couple of days, you've been at some of these, what I would say are Hamas rallies. I don't think that they're pro-Palestine rallies. They strike me as Hamas rallies, but I'll let you discuss that if you think that's a fair estimation. And what do you make of what's going on the ground? Hear it in so many European cities.
So most people are probably familiar with my work because of my writings and videos related to Antifa. But actually before that, one of my main beats was I wrote about and talked about radical Islam, Muslim migration, and integration. That was one of the things that people hated me for, actually.
There's a long list of things that people hate you for.
Yeah.
I'm on that list too. I got a list that they hate me for. It's all right.
So I've been able to bring out like the knowledge and skill set that I have from that prior type of coverage in covering the recent demonstrations of the last 3 weeks since the 7th of October, which is when Hamas launched its terror attacks in southern Israel. I've been on the ground in London covering the demonstrations. Some of them have been very extreme, some have been violent. And I've also been keeping an eye on what's been happening in the US at the university campuses and cities coast to coast. What I've observed in the U.S. is that the agitators and those who are shown up for the direct actions in America are the same actors as those who were involved in the BLM Antifa unrest in 2020. Can
you talk about that for a second from like an operational level? How is it that it seems like, as I said, almost overnight, BLM we had 2 years of crazy BLM Antifa riots and all of that stuff. It cooled off for 2 years under Biden, and then just basically overnight they've turned it on again. That's not just an accident.
Yes, that's an accurate observation. I mean, it was literally overnight that, it actually was the same day on the 7th of October that people showed up in many cities for these celebration rallies. So how they did it is because in 2020, they had months to develop and or strengthen these so-called nonprofit groups that are very adept at grassroots organizing, access to huge email listservs and left-wing groups, all left-wing groups. And so they were just able to send out mass emails, get up the digital flyers, which takes just minutes to make, and just get this information out, show up here at this time, ASAP. And we have a whole generation of American youth who were radicalized just a few years ago, and now they're ready to be the foot soldiers again for the latest cause. It doesn't matter that they are completely ignorant about the history of conflict between the state of Israel or how Israel was even founded, that history conflict of Israel and its Arab neighbors. They're ignorant about the history of Palestinian nationalism. It doesn't matter. It's just, as you've probably observed, and viewers, listeners observed, that they've recycled a lot of the same chants from BLM, no justice, no peace. There's hatred of police sentiment, hatred of America sentiment. It's the same, you could say, grievances. Yeah. Now there's a new one tacked on, which is the so-called Palestinian grievance. The difference between the American protests, demonstrations, and the ones that have been happening in Europe, there's an important distinction in that the ones that are happening in London and in Europe have an element of radical Islam to it that is more predominant than in America.
Right. So from an American perspective, it seems to mostly be like confused college students who are just kind of pawns. Not to say there's no element of it, but here the Islamist element is way stronger.
Correct.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm glad you brought that from the Islamist element. So if people aren't familiar with Islamism, it's about political organizing or political identity around a Muslim identity. And Europe has had, because of bad integration policies, there's been 2 generations or more of British Muslim Europeans who, some of them have been radicalized in a separatist identity. There are organizations that are established here and in other countries in Europe that really push a grievance against wider society. So what I witnessed being on the ground, covering many, many huge demonstrations here, is that there's a leftist element to it, in that you have white British people who are part of socialist groups or communist groups who are coming to recruit. In fact, they're kind of at the forefront of the formal organizing aspect of it. Like they will hand out the placards to people. You'll see socialist workers' parties on these signs. They have tables and booths set up for people.
And they literally set up right outside the tube station, so these people show up and they just hand them stuff.
Correct.
And then they're out there.
It's a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
And then you have Islamists who are there who will chant things in Arabic that people around them, if you don't speak Arabic or if you are not familiar with these chants, you don't even realize how extreme they are. Like, so I recorded some of them chanting about Kevar, which is a chant referencing a time, a part of Islamic tradition stories that Muhammad's army in the 7th century in Arabia slaughtered and killed Jewish communities, and they have a chant associated to that. So, and they say that Muhammad's army is coming for the Jews, where they uses Yahud. They don't say Israelis, they say Jews. So if you're just around there and you don't understand this, you wouldn't even realize it. There have been speakers at some of these so-called pro-Palestine rallies that are literally calling for jihad, and urging for Muslim armies, these are their words, to wage jihad in Israel. So they very much view it unsurprising.
Not just in Israel, here, right?
So they've been really careful in their language because, so in Britain, there's no First Amendment, and there is anti-terror legislation that has restrictions on speech. And because some of these radical Muslim activists and groups have been prosecuted because they will be much more explicit. Some of the speakers here have been a bit more, they've given themselves enough of plausible deniability. In fact, it became a little bit of a scandal here 2 weeks ago because during the speeches about jihad and calling for Muslim armies to engage in jihad against Israel, the Met Police in London.
You posted this, right? It was incredible.
Yeah, they were responding on social media. Well, we have people on our team analyzing the speech, and jihad has a number of meanings. So it's like, this is what I mean when it's like the extreme speakers they're playing with the language in a way that can fool who they need to fool.
Right, which is, by the way, I mean, they're doing that in the States as well, because when they chant from the river to the sea, it's obviously a call for genocide. We know what's between the river and the sea. They're not going to get out there and say, kill all the Jews. Then you have a First Amendment problem. But so they're playing with the language. Do you think that well, we're here in London, so do you think the UK is set up properly to deal with this? I mean, it seems like there is an invasion. That's what it feels like to me, and I think to a lot of people when they're seeing the videos that you're posting.
So there's been only three pro-Israel protests in London since the attacks. The first one didn't happen until a whole week after, and I think because the British Jewish community is genuinely afraid to hold a large public gathering. Yeah. Understandably, there was a lot of police protection for all of them. One of the rallies was outside the police headquarters by a organization called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. And what they were advocating for is that the extremist chants and speeches and signs that have been shown at some of these rallies, that police need to enforce the law and prosecute, arrest, and then prosecutors need to actually prosecute based on hate speech legislation or incitement to violence or incitement to racial hatred. They actually have all those laws here. I haven't seen, at least in the mainstream, discussions about migration and immigration. I think this is an uncomfortable reality for white British to acknowledge or accept, but what I've witnessed and seen and heard at these rallies that I go to is that there's a sense of religious and racial consciousness with some of these British Muslim communities that is on a whole nother level that the average person doesn't really understand. Like, these people they're not just there to show up with the sign and chant. They really have a dedication, a solidarity with their brothers and sisters, as the words they would use in Palestine, that is much more extreme than showing up for a protest and leaving. And I think this points to questions about immigration policies in Britain in the past.
But what do they do forward? I mean, I think a lot of people, at least on the DL, are saying, okay, we really screwed up this immigration thing, and it's obviously partly at least why Brexit happened, but yet here we are. I mean, is there anyone politically that has the power or the will to fix some of this, whatever that means? I mean, this seems to be the question that everyone is asking privately, but nobody's talking about publicly.
Within the mainstream parties here...
By the way, you were at an event last night, a Battle of Ideas event, where you basically asked this and didn't get an answer. So I'm posing the same question to you now.
Well, within Labour, which is the centre-left party, and the Conservative Party, the centre-right party in the UK, neither one have offered an analysis through discussion about immigration. In fact, just a few weeks ago, the Home Secretary, which is she's the head of the UK equivalent of DHS. She has spoken about the failures of multiculturalism in Britain, and anytime anybody in public speaks about it, they are destroyed by the chattering classes in media, and it's like just. I would encourage people to go to some of these so-called pro-Palestine rallies and see if you think this is a success story about British integration. But it's not just a story about Britain; it's the same story in France. Mm-hmm. I mean, in fact, in France, the government there is so afraid of anti-Semitic incitement to anti-Semitic violence that they've actually banned the pro-Palestine rallies. People have shown up,
but they're not doing anything about it. I mean,
they sent police out, but I mean, you have tens of thousands of people in central Paris at some of these demonstrations, and I mean, police will fire off tear gas and all that. It's just an observation I have is like Poland and Hungary have been they face a lot of propaganda against them in liberal media, Western media, mm-hmm. and through the EU, so through institutions as well, and particularly about how they've, in the last decade, have been they've refused to be strong-armed by the EU into accepting large numbers of Muslim migrants, and they've also historically have resisted that as well. And it's not in these places that you see attacks on synagogues or Jewish people being killed or targeted. It's in places that are like in France, in Britain, in Germany, in Sweden.
What would your warning then be for someone that you've been warning about this stuff in America, now you're warning about this stuff here in Britain? What would your warning be for Americans, or is there anything we should be doing politically to deal with some of this before it fully hits us, even though it feels like it might be hitting us already?
We saw what the BLM grievance rage was able to do to America in 2020. Because of the allies and coalitions that BLM was able to build up with Antifa and all these other radical groups. Now they've been able to pull in another grievance group, this being Muslim Americans or Arab Americans. That's really dangerous. And they're so clear in their incitement to violence. You can see it in what's been revealed about many of these academics. I mean, these aren't just radicals who are showing up on the streets that nobody cares about. These are people who have access to young people in academic institutions and are radicalized. And in my view, there's a thread of the same ideology of bloodlust, of a hatred against the country, America, and hating it so much that they endorse terrorism against America and its allies and friends internationally. We have a homegrown radicalization issue in America, and it's on the left. It's a failure of all the counter-extremism or hate watch groups in America, like SPLC, ADL, and all that. We have this whole industry that's been very, very good within civil society to research, encounter, and expose far-right extremism. Bravo to them for that. I don't fault them for doing that type of work. I think that type of exposure in knowledge needs to be out there. But where is it on the far left? Not only do they not do it, they're part of it.
Yeah, right. That's the twisted part. Well, Andy, I suspect, well, first off, we're going to do this more than once every 3 years. That's number one. But I do want to say on a personal note, when you started doing this thing, Were you a student at Portland State when we first met years ago?
I was.
It was one of the first events that I ever did, a free speech event where I was being protested and called a Nazi, and you were a student at Portland State covering it. And you've become really like one of the, well, you're on the very short list of journalists that I don't have to go like this when I say journalist and put air quotes. So on a personal note, I'm very proud of your success. And you're brave. You're genuinely brave. A lot of people in this kind of fake it, but you're still out there, and it's come at great cost to you, I'm sure, well, not only physically, but emotionally and everything else. So I'm glad you're still in the fight, my friend.
Thank you very much, Dave. And I just want to say like how thankful that I am for the work you've done all these years. There's been a lot of YouTubers who have dropped off the scene. You've been through, I mean, it's many years now, and it's really nice to see this consistent figure and face and voice. And thank you for giving a platform to so many of us who we were starting out in our careers and were unknown figures.
I got nothing better to do than save the world, so let's do it, huh?
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.